Roshni. This teacher guide is about our first Mindset Learn series of lessons on data handling called Calculating with Data. In this guide, we tell you what the series of lessons is about and how it links to the curriculum. We also discuss ideas for using the lessons with your learners. You may want to make notes, so have pencil and paper ready. This series of 8 lessons provides learners with the tools and the understanding needed for them to complete their own data handling projects at school. Your learners will need no prior knowledge of data or data handling. The series follows the story of a group of learners who are planning a school concert. And in order to have a successful concert, they need to collect, organize, analyze, display, and interpret data. They also work with the 3 kinds of averages and with different measures of dispersion, including range. In this series, we address Learning Outcome 4, Data Handling and Probability. The Assessment Standard 10.4.1a states that the learner should be able to collect, organize, and interpret data in order to determine the mean, median, and mode of data and know which is the most appropriate under given conditions, and to determine the range, percentiles, quartiles, interquartile, and semi-interquartile range. The Assessment Standard 10.4.1b states that the learner should be able to represent data on a bar graph, a compound bar graph, and a pie chart. They also need to decide which representation is best for the context used. The learning outcome and assessment standards for each lesson are stated at the beginning of each video lesson in the series. In addition, lesson outcomes linked to these are also given for each lesson. Data handling is a relevant and useful section of school maths. In this series, we have set up a school situation that could be real and used it to emphasize the importance of data handling in real-life situations. At each stage of the project, the data has been analyzed and used to make a decision. We would encourage you to get your learners to identify a need in their community, something that they feel passionate about or that they can make a contribution towards. Then, they can identify ways of using their data handling tools from each lesson to help them make informed decisions in their community project. Some examples of research projects that might interest your learners could be any issues related to the food sold at the tuck shop, payment for part-time jobs, or finding a venue for a community event. The success of these video lessons depends on the way you use them in your classroom. We suggest that you watch the lessons yourself as part of your planning. Decide which videos you will use and think about how to integrate them into your learning program. To get the full benefit of the lessons, your learners need to engage actively with the concepts presented. So when you preview the videos, think about how to introduce each lesson and what follow-up activities would be useful. Also watch out for places in the video where you could pause to have a class discussion or ask learners to complete an activity or solve a problem posed in the video. We have used this pause icon to suggest some of these places to you. As you watch each lesson, make a note of materials and other resources you might need to bring to the class. In order to use similar activities in class as the ones presented in the lessons, your learners will need squared paper or graph paper, a ruler, a calculator, a pair of compasses, a protractor, and colored pencils or crayons. Assessment is an important part of teaching and learning, and the lessons provide opportunities for a range of different types of assessment. When you pause the video for learners to do an activity, you can assess their understanding of key ideas in the video and adjust your lesson plan if necessary. The task provided at the end of each lesson is always linked to at least one of the lesson outcomes and thus provides you with a useful assessment opportunity. In this series, you could choose tasks from the lessons that you want to assess, or you could let your learners use their own community needs to plan a data handling project which you can assess. This lesson shows us some examples of important uses of data in the real world. It also takes us through the steps needed in data handling, identifying what data is needed, collecting and organizing the data, displaying or representing the data on a graph, and interpreting the data to reach conclusions. You could use the lesson to help your learners identify what data they will need for a research project. They also need to decide what methods to use for collecting the data. For the task, your learners could consider the question, should your school have 1 break or 2 breaks? You may need to structure and mediate their discussion. This lesson focuses on how to collect information and who you need to collect the information from. We explain the difference between a census and survey, and the difference between a population and a sample. Then our learners take us through the process of writing a good questionnaire with good questions. Use the community issue that your class has chosen or the task given here. This time, learners need to identify the population they need to use, select a sample from it, and develop a questionnaire. This lesson shows learners how to organize their data using tallies and a frequency table. In this lesson, we look at different kinds of bar graphs and read information from them. As with every stage of data handling, we emphasize the purpose of the graphs and the interpretation of them. We look at 2 kinds of compound bar graphs, the dual bar graph and the sectional bar graph. Then we go through the steps involved in drawing a bar graph. It is really important to check that your learners understand how to decide on a scale for both axes of the graph and then use it accurately. In the task, we ask learners to draw a bar graph representing the transport for a school concert used in the video series. To do this, learners will need to plan their own scale from 0 to 60. You can use this task to check that they have the skill of choosing an appropriate scale. This lesson shows learners how to draw a pie graph. To draw a pie graph successfully, learners need to be able to construct angles using a protractor accurately. They also need to multiply and divide with fractions and calculate accurately. We show the learners how to calculate an angle from the information given in a frequency table. They first calculate how many people were surveyed, and then they find the size of the angle that represents 1 person in the sample. This is done by dividing 360 degrees by the number of people in the sample. Then, they can calculate the angle at each sector, multiplying that angle by the number of people that chose a particular option. This lesson carefully goes through all the steps involved in drawing a pie graph. If you use the task suggested here, check that your learners have the correct angle for 1 person before they calculate the angle for each sector. If you use the community issues chosen by the class, encourage them to interpret their graphs and draw conclusions from their findings. They could decide to just show the class, or they could take it to someone who has the power to make a change as a result of their efforts. This lesson is about measures of central tendency or averages. We start by giving definitions of mean, median, and mode, and then demonstrate how to find these 3 averages. We use the prices of tickets for the school concert to discuss which type of average is best suited to this situation. Check that your learners have understood each type of average and why these averages can be so different from each other. You could use the task to assess whether your learners can find and calculate mean, median, and mode. Depending on the type of data research that your learners are working on, This may or may not be appropriate for their data. Try and collect some relevant, current data that can be used to calculate mean, median, and/or mode. In this lesson, we demonstrate the use of different measures of dispersion to make observations about the mass of the hamburger patties that will be sold at the concert. We briefly introduce the learners to box and whisker plots to illustrate these measures of dispersion. Your learners should be familiar with range as a concept, but the interquartile and semi-interquartile range are new concepts. These types of range are more useful to statisticians when there is a large amount of data to interpret. We have used a fairly simple context here with a small amount of data to make it easier to understand these measures of dispersion. The task gives your learners an opportunity to practice the calculations involved in finding the range, the interquartile range and the semi-interquartile range. In this lesson, we present a situation where the range of the data is too large to put on a simple frequency table. So we need to group the data. We consider various sizes for the groups and make sure that the groups do not overlap. We take learners through the steps of drawing a bar graph of the group data. After watching this series of lessons, we suggest that you assess the learners on the whole process of data handling, from the research through to representing and analyzing their findings. This would address the assessment standard 10.4.5 that requires learners to use theory learnt in this grade in an authentic, integrated form of assessment, such as an investigative project. There is a set of lesson notes for this video series on our website. These notes give a summary of the key points of each lesson and the task and task answers. More detailed teacher support for this series, including additional ideas for assessing your learners' progress toward the assessment standards, is also available on the website. We hope that you enjoy this series and that your learners are successful in using their data handling to help them towards solving a real community problem.